So you know that saying, fake it till you make it? Well, in this beautiful sport that is college football, well, that sometimes can be true. You could fake being something in the month of September, fake being a national contender, fake being possibly a bowl eligible team, fake being better than what you actually are. But as the season progresses, as it gets into the darker days of November, you can't fake that kind of stuff anymore. And in the great movie of Zombieland, it's either nut up or shut up time. And in this month of November, it is certainly nut up or shut up for a lot of teams around the country right now in this college football world. Welcome back to the Any Given Saturday podcast. I am recording this on November 7th. We only have a few weeks left of the college football season. Can you believe that? Good Lord Almighty, has this college football season go by extraordinarily quickly. I certainly cannot believe it either, but we're going to enjoy every moment while it lasts because now after this season, I'm going to tell you right now, nothing is going to be the same. But while we're worrying about what could happen in the future, we can focus on the right now, and we have a great show, a great podcast planned for you guys tonight. Here for this podcast as we get into week number 11. We're going to do some game recaps mainly, but we're also going to get into a couple of other things in this podcast here tonight. We got the week 11 alliteration of the power rating reveal. We are going to do that very shortly. We're also going to give a couple of best bets because I'm trying to win some money. You're trying to win some money as well. We all want to win some money in the gambling world. Let's see what we can find this week. A couple of early week games definitely to bring to your attention. Not happening tonight, same day that I'm recording this podcast, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on tomorrow, maybe even Thursday. We'll see what happens there. And the free games that I wanted to recap are free games that surprised me the most, that definitely was a lot different than what those expectations were over the course of last weekend. So quite a bit to get into tonight. I hope you guys are excited for the podcast. If you are, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button for me. Hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel, because we have an opportunity here to grow this college football community from the ground up. And you could join me in this journey of life, of this journey of covering college football at the national level as well, taking that high look down, because we're not afraid to talk about some of these lower conferences as well. We do not discriminate here on Any Given Saturday. But how about those power rating models? Let's go ahead and dive right into that very shortly. We're not going to waste too much time here at all. So we had this was a very wonky week. This was a very wonky week for sure in the regards of, we saw some upsets. We actually saw a pretty good number of upsets. And, that's the thing about November. It's a long season, and teams that looked really good in October or even in September, do all those teams have the same amount of gas in the gas tank in November? Some teams do, and some teams just don't have it in them, right? So let's go ahead and dive into that top 25 because we do have a few changes this week. But a disclaimer first and foremost. First and foremost, what I want to talk about with these power ratings, they are just that. This is not how I would go about ranking the teams for the college football playoff, for example. This is not how I would rank these teams. If I was actually ranking these teams, it would be a lot different. It would be different than what I'm about to show you very shortly. Think of these power ratings in this kind of line of thinking, right? These power ratings, they simply determine if they were playing on a neutral side field today, based on their body of work, who would be favored over whom? Who would be favored? So these are just power ratings. It's just who would be favored over whom. This is not how I would rank these teams. not how we do it. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it, starting with in the top 25. We are going to start from the bottom, as Drake would always say, and work our way up from there. We're going to start with 25 through 21. One notable change, and this is why I want to talk about this disclaimer. I have Clemson ranked number 25 in the country in my power ratings. Do I believe that the College Football Playoff Committee should rank the Clemson Tigers? No. Do I believe that any AP voter in their right mind should put Clemson in their ballot for the top 25? No, I don't think they should receive a single top 25 vote. But I do want to say this. Clemson, realistically, I believe, would be favored against the vast majority of teams in this country. I do see them from that lens as a top 25 team now, and I see them as that top 25 team because of that inspirational performance that they did give against Notre Dame. They ended up pulling the win out, won by 8 ultimately. It's a nice upset, able to possibly get the season, kind of salvage the season for Clemson. It's going to still be that quote-unquote down year, right? But Clemson could possibly maybe get some momentum towards the bottom half of this season and have something to look forward to as we go into 2024 as they try to rebound and regroup. Do I still believe that this Clemson team needs to make some wholesale changes? I think that does need to be a conversation about whether they need to use the transfer portal a little bit more often, embrace that transfer portal, because I think that could help their program in the long term to fill up holes in their roster that Clemson has. But really good win against Notre Dame. They were able to find a way to win it. So because they had that inspirational win against Notre Dame, that's why the power rating model does have them back in the top 25. And then not much other change over that. Got Iowa 24, Cowboys at 23, North Carolina and Texas A&M. They're both staying put. Texas A&M did lose last week. They were expected to lose by 3 points. They ended up losing exactly by 3 points, so I didn't change their rating. Now, going into the top 20 of these Any Given Saturday power ratings. Again, not a ton of change here at this point in the year. I do have Louisville, number 18, Ole Miss at 19, UCLA at 20, Oregon State is at number 17, and then Arizona. Arizona's going to creep their way up. Shout out to the Wildcats, by the way. Wildcats are bowl eligible, I believe, for the very first time since 2017. No one wants to play Arizona. They are one of the most dangerous free loss teams in the country right now. Arizona also has an outside shot of making the Pac-12 championship. They'll need a little bit of help, but certainly not completely out of the question. So shout out to the Arizona Wildcats in that regard. Now, we go into the top 15. Here's what top 15 is looking like right now. One big major muscle movement here, okay? I got Utah moving up 9 spots. I had them at number 22 in the latest power ratings because they were embarrassed the previous week. They rebound in a huge way. Should have been a semi-competitive game against Arizona State. Instead, the Utes blow out Arizona State. We're going to talk about their game specifically in a little bit. So I don't want to get too long here in this particular segment, but Utah, we'll say it like this. Utah definitely surprised me. I thought the Utah Utes showed me some things that I didn't expect to see. And Arizona State kind of regressed in a way that I didn't think was necessarily going to happen. So again, we're going to talk about this game very soon. So we're going to shelve that for a little bit. But Utah was the highest riser in this group this week that actually did make it into the top 25. Here they are at number 13 in the country. And we got Georgia at 12, Tennessee at number 11. We'll see those two play against each other very soon in the SEC East. Okay, so we got through the first 15 teams in this top 25. Now we're going to go ahead, jump into this top 10 real quick. Top 10 is looking roughly the same, right? There's not a ton of change here. I moved Notre Dame down a little bit because of that loss to Clemson. They were in our top 5 last week. We moved them down slightly. Alabama and LSU, okay? So Alabama and LSU in the power rating model, they actually now have the same power rating. LSU was ahead of Alabama last week, but because they had the exact same power rating, and the fact that these two teams literally just played each other on the field, Alabama won in that game against LSU. We had to put Alabama over LSU. Slight bit of an override, because usually if two teams have the same power rating, it's based off of who was ranked higher last week, is how that ordering was determined. But a little bit of an override. We had to put Alabama over LSU there because of the fact that Alabama has essentially clinched the SEC East. All they need is Alabama. I think they just need to win one more game, or Ole Miss needs to drop. Or if Ole Miss drops their game against Georgia this upcoming weekend, Alabama is going to be going into Atlanta, and it's this program that was written off back in September. There were some teams that had a chance to bring them down, but, here they are. Here in November, they still got a shot to go to the college football playoff, because in that regard, they control their own destiny. They win out, they'll be competing for a national championship this year, whether you like it or not. Finally, we'll go into the top 5. We have a new team at the top. And it's not necessarily because Michigan or Ohio State, neither of those teams played bad per se. Michigan did roughly what they were supposed to do against Purdue. They didn't cover against Purdue, but it's still a convincing win. Ohio State did cover against Rutgers. Defense looked really good for the Ohio State Buckeyes, by the way, even though Greg Schiano tried some pretty crafty stuff there, right? But that doesn't change the fact that we do have a brand new number 1 team. And it's because of how dominant Oregon has looked since the last time we saw them play against Washington. Since that loss to Washington, Oregon has been on a mission. They have been dominant. I'm going to tell you right now, don't let Oregon into this college football playoff. If Oregon is let into this college football playoff, they're going to mess around, and a lot of teams are going to find out how good Oregon is. They are a dangerous team right now. They really are. They could really mess some things up in terms of maybe spoiling Washington if we do get a rematch of the Pac-12 championship. This Oregon team just feels like it has the pieces. You got the experienced quarterback in Bo Nix, who looks like a Heisman Trophy candidate. And then you also have a defense that's built in an SEC style, and that has shown on the field. Oregon having one of the best defenses in the Pac-12. They're one of the most complete teams in the Pac-12. And that's why, even though, yes, Oregon did lose to Washington, if those two teams were to play on a neutral site field again, which the Pac-12 championship is going to be in Las Vegas this year, I would venture to say Oregon would be favored on that neutral site field. And if you don't believe that, then you might be a homer. I don't know what to tell you. Oregon's looked extremely good. Oregon, another one of those teams that continues to control their own destiny right now. They're number 6 right now in college football playoff rankings. I expect them to be there when they're revealed later tonight. We'll see if Oregon can maintain the focus, because if they lose a game, then everything I just said doesn't matter, right? They can't lose another game if they want to go to the playoff. But, again, Oregon, a team, if they can find their way in, could find themselves with all the pieces necessarily to win a national championship. Is something to certainly think about moving forward. Speaking of having all the pieces, is all the pieces coming together for a certain other team? Granted, maybe a little bit too late for national implications, but maybe having the opportunity to possibly play spoiler, to play that devil's advocate in that so to speak conference of champions. I told you that we were going to go ahead and take the opportunity to shelve this until we get a chance to go around it. So future me, this is actually going to be your start point. If you're actually paying attention, this is going to be the start of this next segment. Utah, what do you guys remember about Utah last time out before this past weekend? You saw them completely outmatched, outgunned by that Oregon's Duck team that embarrassed a Utah squad that was at home. Now, think about that. Utah doesn't lose at home. They don't get dominated at home nonetheless. They had one of the longest home winning streaks in the country prior to that Oregon game. They were at home once again, and they had a chance to get out there and, hey, prove that that team that took the field against Oregon, we're not that team. We are certainly not that team. Now, granted, you're going to see this team that they went up against with the graphic. It's only Arizona State. Well, let me tell you about this Arizona State team. Arizona State felt like a team that, okay, everything that Arizona State was doing was towards 2024 in terms of playing its younger players, as well as putting in that self-bowl ban as well. So even if they did reach bowl eligibility, they weren't going to go to a bowl game anyways because of that self-sanctions postseason penalty. But in these last 3 to 4 weeks, as they've gotten into Pac-12 conference action, Arizona State was this team that, listen, they came in losing 4 of their last 5 games, but in those 4 of the last, all of those 5 games, they were all competitive games. 4 of them specifically, 3 of the 5 were one-score games, that just a couple of bounces here or there. We could be seeing Arizona State possibly flirting with a potential bowl berth, right? That could have been in the cards. I mean, look at what they did the previous 5 weeks before this game. Lose by 14 to USC. Lose by a field goal against Cal and Colorado. Also losing by just 8 against Washington. They actually didn't allow a single offensive touchdown with that offense with Michael Penix. That's an accomplishment in itself. And then they win convincingly against Washington State. So you had all that going. So yes, Arizona State might be one of the lesser teams in the Pac-12 conference, but at the same time, seems like this is a team that was getting better as the season was going on, certainly progressing better than what we saw in the opening moments of the season back in September. See, that's the thing about saying this is a long season, right? Teams can change from September to November, right? And this Arizona State team looked better going into the Utah game than they were at the beginning of the season. But it didn't matter. It did not matter at all. Utah was pissed. They came pissed, and when a team is pissed off, well, the team on the other end is just going to be in for a long day. Utah, after not being able to score a single touchdown in their previous home matchup against Oregon, they came out against this Arizona State team, and Utah blows the doors off of Arizona State 55-3. And that's why it surprised me so much. I truly thought that this was going to be a competitive game. The odds market also did. Odds by ESPN Bet had this at -9.5 in favor of Utah at home prior to kickoff. But both anything that could have went wrong for the Arizona State Sun Devils, nothing went wrong. Nothing went right. And for Utah, anything that could have went right did end up going right. I mean, what is there to say? And it's not even that necessarily Utah was this electric offense through the air. It's not that they've really dramatically changed their offensive philosophy after the Oregon game. It's just that what they're known for doing with the continuous injury to Cam Rising, they are able to execute at a much higher level. They relied on that ground game. They had far more rushes than passing attempts. They ran the ball close to 50 times compared to just 28 passing attempts. And in those 49 runs, they ran for over 350 yards on the ground. And when you're able to run as effectively as Utah was able to, you're able to control the clock. You're able to constantly move the chains. You're also able to wear down opposing defenses. And it's not even that Utah got off to a slower start, because Utah was constantly scoring in this game. But part of the reason why we see them score even more in the second half than what we saw them score in the first half, even though maybe dogs were called off slightly, was because Arizona State was so demoralized by how effective the Arizona State or the Utah ground game was in this game. 350 yards on the ground. You want to talk about another disparity? 26 first downs for Utah. You know how many first downs Arizona State got today? 6. They had 6 first downs the entire game. So they were getting absolutely demoralized on the ground in this game. And on the other side, offensively, Sun Devils weren't sustaining any drives. You can't get anything going if you're not picking up first downs. I would venture to guess, if I were to check, I'm not going to do it right now, I would venture to check that Arizona State probably had more punts in this game than they did first downs. Lots of free and outs in this particular ball game. And they weren't finding anything on the ground. You know why they only had 6 first downs today? Arizona State couldn't find any answers, period. They couldn't get the ground game going. They couldn't find any consistency in the passing attack. They had 40 yards passing. You know how hard it is to accomplish that in today's college football in 2023, where everybody and their mama loves to go in this kind of spread offense, spread out the defense. It should create more holes in both the passing and running game. Nothing was happening. And it doesn't help either that when Arizona State did happen to get a big play, it was always called back. It was always called back because of penalties. That one of those penalties was a longer pass in the hands of Skeetbo, as well as a punt return that went for a touchdown. Both of those things that maybe could have set up touchdown drives, maybe could have set up maybe this being a little bit more of a competitive game, gets called back. Doesn't count. And, you know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? So I don't know how Arizona State is going to handle this beyond this particular week, because Arizona State has a very difficult 3-game stretch to end the year, okay? They do have the win versus Washington State, so they won't be at the very bottom yet. However, what I am looking at as of right now, they still got to go on the road and play against UCLA, a good UCLA team. They still got to go and play Oregon. Now, that Oregon game will be at home, but Oregon, we just talked about them being, in my opinion, the best team in the country. Oregon would not be favored over any other team in the country right now, the way that they're playing. And they got to go play them in a couple of weeks. And they got to play Arizona. Arizona is not ranked yet, but if the new college football playoff rankings come out tonight after this podcast gets released, I would not be shocked either to see Arizona ranked. So Arizona, they got to play 3 ranked opponents in a row. That is not easy for any program to do. In Arizona State, with all of those young guys, for all of the turmoil that is around this Arizona State team right now, that is going to be even harder of an ask to ask these kids, hey, we got to go out there. We still got to try and compete. Now, moving over to Utah, talking about the winners, what this means for them. I mean, obviously, they were able to bounce back. They looked crisp on offense. And maybe it's one of those things where, hey, Utah is finding a rhythm offensively after all. Because we've seen them now put up 30-plus points in every week, with the exception of that Oregon game. So maybe it is one of those situations where they're finding a formula of success even without Cam Rising. It sure would be nice to have Cam Rising. I think he's a top 15, top 20 quarterback in the country when he is actually playing. But them looking crisp on offense allows that defense, which that's what Utah is known for. When you think of Utah, you're thinking of that defense first. It can dominate the line of scrimmage. It certainly dominated the line of scrimmage. And we talked about that in the Arizona State preview. When some of you guys asked me what I thought about their over-under prediction, I thought Arizona State was going to struggle in the trenches, and that showed up here yet again today. Both sides of the ball. I mean, allowing just 43 rushing yards. Utah had 350, like I was talking about earlier. And when you're able to run like that, you're able to give your quarterbacks, plural, because Utah ended up playing multiple quarterbacks in this game, that allows your quarterbacks who don't have that much experience to get comfortable, allows them to get into a little bit of a rhythm. And now you have Arizona State, those defenses trying to find any answers, and it's hard to come up with those answers when, well, everything's working. So shout out to Utah. Glad that they were able to come out and bounce back. You got a difficult game next week, going on the road to take on Washington. Washington's still undefeated, but the Washington Huskies, they have looked vulnerable the last few weeks. So even though you're on the road, the one thing that does travel, actually two things that travel really well, running the ball and defense. And Utah is certainly capable of doing that. We'll see if this creates a matchup problem for Utah. We'll preview this game later on this week if we ended up getting into another podcast. But keep that in the back of your mind. That could be a mild upset in the works. We'll have to see. We'll have to wait till later this week to dive into that game, though. So some teams surprised me in a good way. And Utah was certainly one of those teams, but there's other teams out there that just end up breaking your heart one way or the other. Sometimes here on this channel, we like to think about the little guys. We like to think about, the smaller schools at the FBS level. We want to pull for them to get that big achievement and to be treated seriously on the big stage. And unfortunately, those dreams, at least at the national level, come crashing down. I'm talking, of course, about the Air Force Falcons. Oh, did Air Force break my heart, man. We actually talked about an Air Force game earlier this year, and I was big on Air Force, man. Air Force was a team that just bullies you, man. And they were undefeated. They just got ranked in the initial college football playoff rankings. This is the first time that this has happened for Air Force. I don't think we're going to see that in the rankings. We're not going to see Air Force when those new rankings come out. We'll just put it that way. So Air Force was taking on Army. And this is a continuation of the Commanders and Chiefs trophy that is fought between the three major service academies, Army, Navy, and Air Force. So Air Force already beat Navy. They already accomplished that earlier this year. But for Air Force to clinch that Commanders and Chiefs trophy for good, Air Force needed to beat Army. And Air Force, what if I told you that Air Force was roughly a free score favorite, okay? Air Force was I believe it was a 17.5 point favorite. It was around that kind of betting line out there. So the 17.5 points were met, but Air Force wasn't the one winning by double digits, though. Army did. Army won. And this was a massive surprise that I don't think a lot of people, even those that kind of look into West Coast football more deeply, I don't think they even saw this coming either. Because here's the thing with Army, okay? Army not only was an underdog in this game, Army was also on a 5-game losing streak. They were on the verge of not being able to be bowl eligible and not be in that position. So Army was fighting for their lives. But here we are, Army at 2-6. They end up winning 23-3. Now, we talk about the idea of, okay, rivalry games, even if two teams look lopsided, things could always get a little bit weird in terms of these rivalry games. However, this goes beyond being quote unquote weird. Now, this was a quote unquote neutral site game at Mile High in Denver, but Air Force is in the same state. So this is essentially a home game for Air Force, okay? So what happened here? How is it possible for a team that was actually an 18.5 point underdog? How do they end up winning by 20? How does it go 20 points the other way? We'll break it down like bit by bit because I'm looking at the stat lines. Now, Army had 213 yards on the ground, which sounds impressive. But when you think about military academies being able to run the ball 90% of the time is really not that impressive. Army only had 4.2 yards a carry. They actually had slightly more yards per carry than Air Force. Air Force was actually worse off running the ball. They had less than 4 yards a carry. The Air Force Academy, living up to its Air Force legacy, had more yards through the air than Army did. Army did more of its damage on the ground. They are our ground troops as well. So that's not it. That's not what led to this huge upset for the Army Black Knights. Shoot, even looking at the penalties. The penalties. Army had 11 penalties in this game. That equated to 119 penalty yards. That's twice as much penalty yards as the other team. So what happened here? What happened here? Miscues of a different kind, ladies and gentlemen. Air Force turned the ball over 6 times in this game. Air Force had 4 fumbles. They threw multiple interceptions. And that doesn't even talk to the unwritten turnovers, the turnovers that don't count. They also missed a 32-yard field goal. They turned the ball over on downs twice. So technically, if you count those in, Air Force actually had 9 turnovers. No one, not Georgia, not the 2007 Patriots, there is no football team on this planet, no matter how good you are, you can't win, turn the ball over that many times. It's brutal, and it can't happen. It simply can't happen. And listen, shout out to Army. Tip of the cap to the Army Black Knights, right? I'm not trying to take anything from Army. This is a big win for them in a rivalry game, underdog in a rivalry game. They also get a little bit of momentum as this is their now last year in the independent ranks. They're going to be part of the American Conference, which makes so much sense, by the way. Having a military academy, an American team, and in the American Conference, that just makes so much sense from a branding standpoint. I'm sure Army is not that caring about its branding for a football program, but it's a nice move. Army didn't win this game. Air Force lost this game. That's truly what happened here today, is that the Air Force was not able to be disciplined. They made all those mistakes, and Army did just enough, took advantage of those mistakes, and because of that, they were able to come out and win this game in front of 52,000 fans at the neutral side game. Who says the military academies don't matter in today's college football? I certainly didn't. I hope you guys feel the same way as well. So, that being said, Army now controls its destiny to hoist the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. We'll see Army eventually play the Navy in that Army versus Navy game, one of the oldest rivalries in college football. But first, we'll see Army. They'll host Holy Cross. Holy Cross, even though they are an FCS squad, not to be taken lightly, because we did see Holy Cross push Boston College to the brink, and Boston College is now bowl eligible, I think. So Holy Cross is a good team, even though they're an FCS squad. So hopefully Army doesn't have that kind of letdown type of game. And as for Air Force still owns the all-time series. There's going to be up 38-19 on Army. But the longest winning streak in Air Force Academy history for its football program of 13 straight wins, well, that is going to come to an end for last weekend. It does match a school mark that was set in the mid-1980s, but that winning streak will come to an end. And also, that highest ranking in 2 decades that Air Force has, well, they're not going to be able to build off of that. There will be out of the college football playoff poll for sure. They'll most likely be out of the AP as well. So they will be an unranked team after the new college football rankings come out. But they will go back into Mountain West action. And while this loss does put Air Force probably out of the running to go to a New Year's Six Bowl, or at least it would need a lot of chaos to happen in order for Air Force to get to a New Year's Six Bowl at least, they still hold their own destiny to get to the Mountain West Conference Championship. So most of the goals that Air Force had, that maybe that coaching staff reasonably put together at the start of the year, I don't know if the New Year's Six Bowl was one of those possibilities. They still hold that in their hands. They're still at the top of the Mountain West. They can still control their own destiny in that regard. And they'll take on Hawaii. And then they'll have UNLV. They also have Boise State on the road as well. If Air Force can win 2 of those 3 games, particularly as beat UNLV, then Air Force will be in that Mountain West Championship game. They might also be hosting as well, since I believe the Mountain West, they do it based off of who has the best conference record. That's who actually gets to host. So really disappointed for Air Force. I was really pulling for them to somehow get that triple option into like a New Year's Six Bowl. I don't think it's going to happen this year. And that's tough to see, but congrats to Army. You kept your bowl hopes alive. You still got 3 more games that you got to go out and win. Best of luck in those endeavors. So my voice is a little tired already. So I want to take a quick sip before getting to this last game that really surprised me. Take a deep breath as well. Let's go to somewhere where it's a little bit warmer right now, regardless of what time of the year it is. How about down in that state of Texas? There's always a lot of college football, high school football, you name it, they have it. There's always some kind of football happening in the state of Texas. But maybe one Texas team that doesn't get talked about enough, Texas State Bobcats. They host Georgia Southern, and Texas State wins 45-24. But that's not the biggest story here. Texas State, because they win their 6th game of the season, for the very first time in program history, Texas State is bowl eligible. That is the story here. So right off the bat, congratulations to Texas State for being bowl eligible for the very first time. Judging by how many bowl games are out there, I'm sure Texas State, regardless of what happens in these last few games of the season, they are going to go to a bowl game. And that's a big achievement for Texas State. And the reason why Texas State was able to do what they did is, at a lesser level, they kind of embrace that Colorado philosophy in terms of building through the transfer portal. It wasn't as dramatic, but Texas State brought in the 2nd most transfers in the country, just behind Colorado. That was the only team that brought in more transfers. Now, for the big benefit for, a G5 school like Texas State, there's not as much of a gap within the group of 5 as there may be, within like your typical Power 5 conference. So for Texas State to get all of these transfers, they really put themselves in a good spot to just in 1 year go from being arguably a bottom dweller, which is what they were in 2022. That's why they fired their coach. They got a new guy in. That's why they were able to bring in all of these transfers that they did, to now towards the top of this Sun Belt West, possibly competing for a Sun Belt championship. They'll need a little bit of help, but Texas State is right in there in the thick of things. So what happened in this game? So the model thought that Georgia Southern was going to win this game. And I mean, it looked close like either way. Texas State was only a 2.5 point favorite, but surprisingly, the Bobcats handled business. And they were led by a quarterback that's going to sound familiar to a lot of you guys, actually, TJ Finley. If you guys remember TJ Finley, he started his career at LSU, then went to Auburn for a couple of years, and, up and down tenure at Auburn. And now he's here at Texas State, actually gets a chance to be the full-time starter for an entire year. And TJ Finley's balling out, man, at least in this Sun Belt Conference. In this game in particular, he threw for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. And what allowed Texas State to really took control in this game, they scored on 6 consecutive drives. And it didn't start from the get-go. After a fumble that they had late in the first quarter, here is how those next 6 drives specifically played out for Texas State. Touchdown, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, touchdown, and then, wait for it, you guys aren't going to believe it, touchdown. we got a touchdown there as well. So, Texas, that last touchdown happened in the third quarter. And at that point, Texas State was up 45-10. This was actually more of a lopsided game than what meets the eye. And Georgia Southern is a good team. That is a very quality football team in the Georgia Southern Eagles. This is a Georgia Southern squad that was able to win 6 games as well. They're also kind of in that thick of things as well in the Sun Belt East. They, even with this loss, they still have a chance to go to the conference championship game because they have the win over Coastal Carolina. So even with this loss, they still kind of control their own destiny. But I really want to talk about this game because of Texas State. Because this is the beautiful thing about, I think, what NIL and what the transfer portal is going to bring to college football in the long term. I think it's going to create more parity. I think we're going to see more situations in the future where, it only takes 1 year to make that, 3, 4, 5 win jump. It's possible. It's more possible than it's ever been. And we're already seeing it in college basketball as well. Last season, we just had Florida Atlantic and San Diego State in the Final Four. Who saw that coming? It's going to bring more parity to the sport. I'm absolutely here for it. So we'll talk about the winners for a little bit, see what's next for the winners. Now, Texas State does need some help if they want to go to the conference championship game because they're only 1 game behind Troy. However, they already did play Troy, and Troy won 31-3, or 31-13. So Troy would need to lose 2 of their next 3 games, and Texas State would need to win out. Assuming that somehow Texas State or Troy does lose 2 of those next 3 games. 2 of them are bottom dwellers, so I doubt it. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Troy somehow drops those 2 of those next 3 games. What is Texas State's schedule looking like? They got Coastal Carolina on the road. That could be a big one. That could be a possible Sun Belt Championship preview. Certainly there. And then they'll have Arkansas State on the road. Decent team. They looked a lot better in September, by the way. A lot of people remember Arkansas State from Butch Jones fake crying or actually crying on the sidelines after Oklahoma was raw dogging him. No, Arkansas State's actually a solid team after all. And then they'll have South Alabama at home, a team that I did have, admittedly, winning the Sun Belt this year. They disappointed. South Alabama has been a disappointment. It's going to be a senior day as well. So I'm sure that'll be an emotionally charged home atmosphere for their final home game. But there is, I say this because there's a real chance out there that Texas State could build off of this. They've already have the most wins in their time at the FBS level. It's a very real possibility that they can finish this year with 8, 9 wins. That's a great year for Texas State. And as for Georgia Southern, this loss sucks. This loss doesn't look good at all. But even Georgia Southern, who, like I said, really good team there in Georgia Southern, they still control their own destiny to get to the Sun Belt. They got Marshall on the road. And Marshall is another team that has disappointed me. I thought Marshall was going to hit their over-under in terms of, I thought they would hit the over in terms of number of wins this year, but they haven't done it. They're not going to do it. So they've been a disappointment for me, but, we'll see what this Marshall team could do towards the back end of the season. They have Old Dominion at home, which, could be a spicy team. Loves to give certain squads a scare, but I expect Georgia Southern to win that game too. But the big game that's going to determine who could possibly represent the East for the Sun Belt, because James Madison is not eligible for the Sun Belt Championship because of those archaic NCAA rules. I strongly disagree with it, but I'll dive into that another time. That road game against Appalachian State. Those two teams are tied right now in the Sun Belt Conference standings. Georgia Southern already has a win against Coastal, but if Georgia Southern beats App State on the road, then it's very likely that Georgia Southern would be the ones that would represent the Sun Belt East in the event that James Madison cannot get their waiver approved by the NCAA before the end of this season. If there is an NCAA waiver, I would imagine the Sun Belt would follow suit as well. That's a conversation for another time. But this is an impressive win by Texas State. But the job's not done. It's not finished for the Bobcats. They could be in store for an amazing season. A one remembered in the record books at Texas State University. It just depends on what they want to do in this last month of the season. It's all up to them. Georgia Southern also control their own destiny. Hey, who knows? In this beautiful game of college football, we might see these two teams play again. You truly never know. So that wraps up all of the games that I wanted to specifically talk about, but want to jump into, my best bets. This is my favorite part of the podcast for me personally, because I like winning money through sports gambling. You like winning money through sports gambling. Okay. We all like to win money through sports gambling. We all want to do it. Last week, we struggled. We did admittedly struggle with our two best bets. We only managed to get two out because I couldn't get a second podcast out again. Hopefully, we change that this week. I think we're on a good pacing right now. I think it's really possible we get a second podcast out, actually. Thank the Lord. But that being said, though, we went 0 for 2. That's not acceptable. We're not winning money that way. We're going to change that, though. We're going to change that this week. So, how I always like to do my 4 for 4s, how I always like to structure them, is I kind of want to pull from different days, because there's a lot of different days where football is actually being played. So, with this podcast likely either dropping either later today when I'm recording this or at the latest tomorrow, let's go ahead and jump into some of these couple of games that are going to be happening early in the week that maybe could be sparking your attention. So, take a quick drink. Because we are certainly thirsty. And let's be like Trey Songz and dive into this thing. So, first game that we have, it's a Wednesday game. And there's no greater feeling than midweek action, seeing a bunch of snow and snowy weather conditions. Just night games in the Midwest, man. There's just something special about the feeling. Maybe that's just my inner Midwestern coming out in the regard. But Wednesday, one of the games that is happening is Miami versus Akron. We're going to go with Miami here, minus 17.5. Akron coming off of their first FBS victory against Kent State. Emotional victory. They had to storm back to win that game, to ultimately win the wagon wheel. It just feels like a spot that we could have a letdown kind of effort from Akron. Not to mention the Miami Redhawks are one of the best teams in the conference. They look like they have a legitimate shot of going to the MAC championship. Believe that's in Detroit still. I'm not entirely sure. If you're someone that follows the MAC more closely, let me know if I'm wrong down in the comment section. So we're going to go with Miami 17.5. It could get ugly out in Oxford, Ohio. And then Thursday night, yes, we are going to that Thursday night, same night as the NFL. Well, college games happens too. They matter as well. This Thursday night, there actually is a team that is still in the conversation to go to college football playoff. They still control their own destiny. The Louisville Cardinals. The Louisville Cardinals are going to be a team that still has its college football playoff hopes alive. I knew that it was going to be a softer schedule, but I did not think that Louisville would still be in this possession here in the month of November. But they're taking on Virginia. Virginia has looked better, but Louisville defensively, no one's really talking about it, but it can be a scary good unit. And they have an experienced quarterback. They have a coaching staff that knows how to utilize the talent on this roster. So the spread's a little bit high at 20.5, but we're going to go for it. We are going to go with the 20.5 that Louisville is favored, and we're going to lock it in here tonight. So hopefully both of those hit, and here's to hoping that we have better luck with the Wendy's 4-for-4 special than what we did this previous week. But guys, my voice is starting to get tired, so we're going to go ahead and sign off for tonight. We will have more Any Given Saturday content later this week. Later on in the week, I will be doing game previews of all of the top 25 matchups from the college football playoff. And not only that, will we also round out that Wendy's 4-for-4 special in that next podcast as well. So make sure you want to tune in for the full thing. Speaking of that full thing, though, if you have made it all the way through this podcast, you're a real MVP. I truly do appreciate that. But you can continue to show that appreciation by doing a couple of things. If you haven't done so already, you could hit that like button. This lets me know that, hey, you enjoy the content here on this channel and you want more of it. And likewise, you have a real opportunity to be that A1. A1 since day one, baby. And you can do that by just hitting that subscribe button right now and being an OG supporter of the Any Given Saturday podcast. So that being said, I'm going to sign off. I am your host, Jake, and I hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.